There are many things wrong with World of Tanks, and today's video is going to showcase exactly why new players want to bash their head against a brick wall in 99% of their games. Today's replay is showcasing the most disgusting tier 5 vehicle potentially in World of Tanks that was ever created, and this is the Panzer V4. It is the tier 5 that has super nice DPM. It also gets the fact that it is a Panther hull that can go like 50 kilometers an hour, if not faster, and basically is the ramming potential of an IS-7 at tier 5. And that means that this thing is ridiculous. You can see this tank basically rip holes in all of the opponents on the enemy teams, and we'll see that in this replay. So the real reason that the Panzer V4 is just so broken is that not only does it get the armor, it has the DPM as you're seeing here, it has the kind of lack of penetration on the standard rounds, but because it's Wargaming, they give it very, very good premium rounds that basically mean you can pen everything and anything that you come up against. And also remember, down at tier 6 and tier 5 and tier 4, where you'll be meeting the majority of your opponents, you're basically one of the nicest tanks to play. And when you're playing up against people that have never played World of Tanks before, things like the Matilda Black Prince that you can see on screen here, it's just not fair whatsoever. And it's the fact that Wargaming released these kind of premium tanks that, and they never really do too much about them, and they never take any real action towards them, that these tanks basically dominate as much as they do. Now you can see there's very little that the opponents can do, and even if they do know what they're doing, the Panzer V4 has a ridiculous amount of hit points, 680, compared to a lot of the other tanks at this tier. It's definitely one of the more advanced kind of tiers tanks in the game, and it is so dominant just purely because of the armor model. The tank can bounce rounds. Yes, the turret armor is a little bit weak, but it has pretty much everything else, so you don't really have to worry at all. And when you've got the DPM that you're seeing here, there's nothing that this Stug can really do. You can see him just baiting rounds into the upper plate. They're never really going to be able to fully penetrate, at least consistently. Yes, the Stug might be able to if he just basically sits there, but for the most part it's just not going to happen. And especially when you get players like we're witnessing here, who obviously know their way around World of Tanks, side scraping off of this corner here, exposing very little of the lower plate because of the tapered ridgeline that we've got here. You can just basically tell that this player knows what they're doing, and even if you don't, you can still get away with a lot in this vehicle, just purely because it is such a monster. Now you're seeing here that the Sturm, well, the Semavente is actually sat there trying to deal damage, but unfortunately for him it is to no avail, and having picked up 3,200 damage in a tier 5 game. Yes, a tier 5 that has the DPM that most mediums at tier 6 would probably love to have. Yeah, I just think it's nowhere near fair enough for the enemy team, and given the fact that this thing has the hit points it does, the speed it does, and also all of the extras that this vehicle does, then there's nothing they can really do. And especially when you're coming up against tanks that genuinely just don't have the penetration required to be able to deal with you. Now this Excelsior here obviously knows that he should be advancing, and you're seeing that him do that here. Now the lower plate is of course one big weakness of the Panzer V4, but when the player knows to pull back around the ridge lines, there's nothing the Excelsior can do. And we all have been in this sort of situation where you just get caught out time after time and time after time, and these sort of tanks just do not help the lower tier player base, because ultimately the skill cap of these vehicles is so high that if the advanced players do decide to just go down and seal club, and because players are human and humans typically are maybe not the nicest of people, then yes, people do end up just playing at tier 5 continuously, even though they really should be playing tier 10s, and you end up with this scenario where one player is just absolutely farming the enemy team, because ultimately they're a player that is one of the highest tier in the game, and when you're playing in a tank that is just overpowered tier for tier, then of course the combination of both is going to be ridiculous. Now you can see in this replay there is just one tank left alive, and of course it would happen to be the other version of the Panzer V4, the broken 5-4 as I like to call it, and you can see him just trying to run away, and this is what World of Tanks has really come to, whereby the two biggest, baddest tanks on the team are the ones that are left alive, trying to just duke it out against each other. There are, of course, a couple of others on his team, but having done 4,135 actual damage, well spotted, because of course he's been firing blind into a lot of tanks, it's just, to all intents and purposes, a rout for the enemy team, and that's exactly what the Panzer V4 does down at this tier. And we're going to have a look at some other vehicles before we end this one up. So you can see here the Panzer V4 and the enemy team deciding to come out, and you can see the weak point of the vehicle is of course that turret and the side armour, but nonetheless you can see just the pure power that this vehicle has in World of Tanks. Let's have a look at some of the other hated tanks down at tier 6. The other vehicle that we have in today's replay is, of course, the T-34-85M, and this is the tier 6 Russian or Soviet tank, medium, and of course it is a ridiculous one, and it's because it gets this 85mm. If you've ever seen things like the T-34-88 from any of the other versions, it's basically the same tank. It is a tech tree tank, so anyone can basically get this thing, but it is a primary seal clubbing tank for a lot of tier 6s, and that's because this vehicle has brilliant view range for the tier. It has really fantastic DPM. It's also got the mobility, a little bit of armor, and so generally all around it's a monster. As you can see, a nice round into the M4 Sherman, who is deciding to cross, and as with most experienced players, they know that you can basically farm all of the people that cross on this direction. And with the TOG now moving forward, or at least two TOGs now moving forward, it's the prime opportunity to use the damage per minute of the T-34-85M to just outplay the TOGs. And you can see here, using a very slim shot onto both TOGs, he's able to lock down the enemy's tracks, and you can see they're both trying to escape, or at least get away with it. But unfortunately for them, because of the rapid fire nature of this vehicle, they're able to just basically get farmed super hard. And you can see here that this sort of position against tanks that generally, to be honest with you, don't have armor at all, is going to be a very nice one. And you can see here him just waiting for the turret armor to come out from behind the ridge, and now it's just a case of farming up the damage. And unfortunately for the enemy TOG, they actually got tracked by the artillery piece such that they are behind the building, which means that they are now prime target for the player here playing in the T-34-85M. And this is purely showcasing how devastating this tank can be up against these opponents, because there is nothing that they can do realistically. The best bet for them is to actually just leave. There's nothing you can really compete with the damage per minute of this vehicle, or at least the amount of damage you can do per shot, and because of the accuracy of the tank as well, it's just consistently going to be hitting you for damage after damage after damage, and so you cannot, unless you can guarantee every single one of your rounds to hit, there's no point in trying to fight the T-34-85M, and especially when it has the accuracy, the mobility, the players that typically play in this tank. You can see that this player right here does in fact have 3 marks, and he's able to shut down the enemy P-43 quite easily. And this is the kind of problems that you have when playing down at tier 6, and for new players this must be atrocious. Like, when you do not know anything about the game and you've got these players that have probably played 50,000 battles and they're sat there playing in their tier 6s with full skill crews, and of course that's the case in many different games, that new players will come up against veteran players and experienced players, but when the tanks are available for the skilled players to just farm them in, it is a little bit disappointing. And although you can see in this replay he's managed to pick up 3,000 damage, which is a stonking result regardless of what tank you're playing in, it's just amazing to see. You can see here farming through the little the little gap between the door and of course the wall, and it's just continually pumping out that damage. The TOG, not particularly the nicest tank to try and deal with if you were on, or if it was on full health, but considering that this tank has basically farmed 2 full hit point TOGs and received very little damage in return, then you can imagine how good this thing is. Now the M10 RB FM there is of course not in the nicest of positions. He's fired off his little clip, and it's now the point in time where he's just going to basically get farmed by this vehicle. The M10 is, of course, like another little seal clubbing tank, or at least a tank that a lot of veterans jump down to this tier in, but nonetheless, it doesn't really make much of a difference because, of course, the T-34-85M is just tanking the hits and just racking up the damage within this result. Obviously, moving now forward towards the M10 because why not? You need to get some extra damage, and if you've done 4,100 damage already, why not try and get some more? And now moving forward into this position, you know that the enemy M10 is up here somewhere. You have no idea if there's anyone else up there, but it's very difficult to kind of decide as to what to do next. But from this position, of course, now they have to overcrest the ridgeline, which means anyone that decides to try and get a shot on him is going to get forced into basically taking a shell. So you can see here a very nice position to begin with. The Panzer behind him needs to be dealt with, and he has been, and now the M10 RBFM is taken out from this game. Of course, you know that this vehicle has 180 alpha damage per shot, which is very, very nice considering the tier, and it's why it makes this tank so devastating for the majority of the tier players that you're going to be playing up against, because they don't know how to deal with both the rapid fire of this tank and also the alpha damage of the tank, because if you equate this, it's like having probably a 390 alpha damage per shot tank at this tier. So you've got to be very careful when coming up against these things, and new players just are not going to be able to do it, and it's why these vehicles are just horrible, and why players that decide to jump down and farm them and grind them out and play so many games in them, it's kind of a little bit sad from my personal point of view. It's not the gameplay that I enjoy, and it is basically just farming against people that have never played the game before. But ultimately, Wargaming are the ones that actually let this happen, are the ones that release these tanks into the game and do not do anything about them. Things like the Panzer V4, the T-34-85M, and at this point, you can see just what happens when you come up against the players that just haven't actually got a clue. At this point, the SU-100Y is over in the other corner. You can see he's in the bottom right-hand side of the map. And at this point, you'd be thinking in most other tanks, there's no way I'm going to get there before the game ends. But unfortunately, for the enemy team, he is going to be able to get there because the speed of this vehicle, you can go 45 kilometers an hour. So not only do you have a little bit of armor, nothing too special, you'll get penned by every single tier 7 and tier 8 in the game, and you'll probably get penned by most tier 6s, but at least you can bounce a few rounds, which is more than can be said for a lot of vehicles. And of course you get the DPM to kind of back that up. Now the Italian tank destroyer there has come around the corner. The SU is also coming around the corner, the box tank, and this is really where the tank comes into full force. You can see the Italian now moving forward, just trying to be a nuisance, and you can see him getting into a bit more of an aggressive position right here. And I see him poking the ridgeline. This is obviously what the best players do well, and that is basically just farming up the damage against these vehicles, using the slim profile, kind of giving them small angles, and there you go. The enemy tanks have all been taken out within this replay. Of course, let me know what you think of these vehicles. Are there far worse tanks in World of Tanks that you just think are purely overpowered down at the tiers that they're in? Let me know in the comment section down below, and of course, let me know what other vehicles you'd like me to review, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.